From the celebrated imagination of Dean Koontz.
450 million books sold and counting.
13 of his scary novels have hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list.
I'm just the guy who lives down the street and I do books instead of sell cars.
If that's true, then Dean Koontz is the Henry Ford of authors.
The imagination's a muscle, partly, and the more you use it, the easier it becomes.
And the stories that spring from his imagination just don't slow down. In his latest novel, The Friend of the Family, Koontz creates the story of Alita, a young girl exploited as a Depression-era carnival oddity who is rescued and adopted. Alita possesses an eidetic memory and has prophetic dreams, and she believes she can protect her new family from harm.
But I became fascinated with the background of Carnival, with the lore of Carnival, with the way it's a society of outcasts, people who choose not to live within the normal society, and often because the normal society doesn't want to live with them, and they form a world of their own.
Northwest Passages is honored to host Dean Koontz in conversation with Comma managing editor Donna Wares.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, Dean. It's so wonderful to have you here at Northwest Passages and wonderful to see you again. Thank you for being part of our community book club.
Well, it's wonderful to see you after these. I don't know how many years it was when we last did this, but it's been a while, so it's good to be back with you in a new location.
It is, and I love introducing you to the amazing people of Spokane, which is really one of the most amazing book communities I could ever imagine, and which is why I'm back and I'm part of Comma. And so I wanted to start out talking, your new book is really such a change of pace in so many ways, and I wanted to address it right at the top. I'm wondering, what kind of feedback did you get from Elsa when she heard that the canine character in this book is a German Shepherd and not a Golden Retriever?
Well, there were family discussions, certain disagreements, but they were all resolved by giving her more cookies, so that was okay.
That's great, and I saw her in the background of some of your previous events, so clearly she's on board with the book tour.
She's here right now, and she's hiding at the moment, but she doesn't hide too long. She'll strut her stuff before we're done, I'm sure.
Well, we look forward to seeing that. I also want to talk about some of the other new elements in your book. Obviously, it's no surprise that it would be a thriller with many twists and turns. That's a classic, but you've gone into historical fiction and really a dash of magical realism, which was very interesting. You take us inside Prohibition-era Hollywood in such fascinating detail. And I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to tell this story?
Well, it's a difficult time often when you're trying to talk about inspiration, because sometimes, in fact, quite often, you don't know where it came from. It just pops into your head. This would be interesting to deal with. Other times, you know where it came from. I was listening to a song coming home from a studio meeting on a film project, and you're always in a very bad mood when you're coming home from a studio meeting about a film project. And I had my wife's car, and it was the days of 6 CDs on the music rack. And she had all Simon and Garfunkel or Simon on. Paul Simon's one of my favorites ever. And I was listening to a song called Patterns. And I'd heard that song many times, but all of a sudden a line in it, my life is made of patterns that can scarcely be controlled, totally inspired a novel that was set in my mind in about 15 minutes called Life Expectancy. So those moments you can get where it came from. In the case of The Friend of the Family and Alita, the lead character, I think it was I can't say there was a moment it occurred to me, I'm going to write this, but I think it was three things. One, I had a very unpleasant childhood, an alcoholic, violent father, deep poverty. We didn't have internal plumbing in our house till I was 11. And I have always dealt with that because when you're growing up in that kind of family in a small town, the biggest element of it isn't the poverty, it's the humiliation of having that kind of father. He was a womanizer, a gambler, always in trouble, and everyone in town knew it. So that was part one of the inspiration, a character who suffered humiliation all of her life when the story begins. Now, what was the next part of that going to be? Well, I've always been fascinated with carnivals because we lived across the street from the county fairground, and every time the carnival came, I snuck into it every way I knew how through the fencing, and I knew every way. And therefore, I'd lived for a week in among the carnies, and I loved that world. And I thought, what if this character who I'm going to write about was somehow much an outcast as I felt growing up. And she was an outcast in the carnival, not in the carnival, but from the world, because she was what would have been called a freak. Now, freak shows were outlawed in about the 70s, I believe. And that meant right away it was going to have to be an historical setting. There goes my dog. And that's sort of how it all fell together. And then one of my favorite periods of history is the 1930s to the 1945, say. We were between two great world wars. Art Deco is a great fascination of mine. And the movies of that period are likewise among my favorites. So that sort of all fell together, and there was a novel about somebody who at 17 had led a life of humiliation by being exhibited in a freak show, and one day is rescued from it by a family with exceptional compassion. And when all that fell together, I thought, wow, this is going to be an interesting book, quite different. I'd written one other book set in what would be called an historical period now, the 60s, but this goes back quite a way further. And it was quite a challenge, but quite exciting as well to research the period I already felt I knew a lot about and found out there was much more I had to learn.
The era that you create at the museum, what you call the Museum of the Strange, travels to the carnivals and the speakeasies, and you really capture that. And it starts out, pretty dire, and yet you spin a book that's full of empathy, acceptance, and family. Did you deliberately tie those two opposites together?
I think it was probably writing out of my youthful experience of being an outsider in the town because of our family. And actually, my mother was a great person, but very sickly and unable to deal with my father adequately. And that, I think I always dreamed of somehow being discovered as belonging to a different family. And what Alida, who is in this carnival freak show, called a 10-in-1 in those days, because there were 10 human oddities in the show. All of them, by the way, except for her, all of them in freak shows at that time were participants in the box office. So they could get quite rich for their time, but Alida was not. She was essentially owned by the carny who owned the 10-in-1. And I think in some ways I was writing about my dream as a child of finding out that I belonged in another family, because this carnival guy who runs the 10-in-1, when the carnival is out of season, he takes Alida around to very high-end speakeasies where they had orchestras, floor shows. The people came wearing tuxedos and gowns. And he used her as an opening act to the main act in the orchestra of those speakeasies. And one night, this couple shows up who has great wealth for the time because they were successful in silent movies and are moving into talkies now as producers. And they essentially buy her from this Carney, but not for any negative purpose, but to fold her into their family as essentially one of their children. So in a way, I think this book was as an adult, of quite an advanced age, writing about something I dreamed about as a child, and finding your way into another world that is radically different from the one you've been raised in.
I was reading it and noticing that your character, your main character, the young woman who has all of these things happen throughout her journey, finds comfort in two ways. One through books, and the other through the company of a loyal dog. And that, of course, made me think that mimics your own story. So let's first start with the books. You've written in the past about the life-saving power of books. How did books save your life?
Well, when you're growing up in the kind of house I grew up in, you kind of accept that all families must be this way, that when the door closes, even those families that seem so much happier and more well-to-do may, inside the closed door, be just like yours. All the argument, all the violence, all the despair that goes with it, and you think they're that way. Well, one great advantage of books and reading so many as I did as a child was that it showed me there were other families, there were other ways to live, there were other things to hope for or try to achieve. And that was a very big plus of books, but also just the escape factor, being able to read and be taken out of that house and out of that family and out of that world for a while was very beneficial. It was much more beneficial actually than Prozac, because Prozac may be habit forming. And so are books, but without the same physical effects. So books became incredibly important to me. And I was reading constantly, and actually by the age of 8, was writing little books, binding them up in with staples, drawing the cover and selling them to relatives for a nickel. So I started out as publisher, writer, illustrator, agent, and author, all in one package.
Wow, you're quite the young entrepreneur. So you've written upwards of 140 books, and I read on your website that you read about 150 books a year, which that's kind of extraordinary. How do you manage that?
Well, it started when first let me correct, a lot of, I've written near 100 novels. Then I've written little gift books that are about dogs or from the point of view of my dogs. Some of those have been quite successful. And I've written books of poetry for kids, funny poetry. So I've written all kinds of things, whatever takes my fancy. But it's, now I forget your question. Oh,
about your reading, yes. I mean, not only are you an astonishingly prolific author, but just to have the ability to read so many books. How do you pull that off?
Well, when my wife and I were first married, we were high school sweethearts, and we were married, but without almost anything. We had a car, a used car, $150, and our clothes and our jobs, and that was it. And as a consequence, we couldn't afford a television set. So we read books, which you could check out from the library. Or in those days, a paperback was 50 cents or 60 cents. So we could afford that. And we read every evening. And in those days, in the end of the year, we kept little lists of the books we read. And we each read close to 200 books a year in those days, in evenings and holidays. And that habit never went away. We eventually got a television, watched it more, now, after all these years, we find less and less we want to watch. So we're sort of back to where we were in the beginning. But the time is there if you don't do a lot of other things that people do. My wife has said one of the things that has kept us married for 59 years is I have no interest in watching sports on television. And that does give us a lot of time.
That's wonderful. So in The Friend of the Family, your main character, we talked about, is a very avid reader and has a special gift to recall everything about the book she reads. One of her, as we find out, one of her special abilities. And it turns out that she likes many of your favorite authors as well, including Charles Dickens.
Yes. I have to admit, when I was in high school and college, I was a terrible student. I didn't want to read what they told me I had to read. I wanted to read what I wanted to read. And I didn't want to write papers about what they told me I should write a paper about. So I developed this rather criminal habit of just making up everything in the papers I wrote, book reports, other papers. I would invent the title of books that I supposedly drew footnotes from. I would invent the names of authors. I was completely scurrilous, but I always got away with it, which I found fascinating. I got away with it through high school, college. Nobody ever called me on it. I don't recommend this to young readers and students currently in school. You have to have sort of a larcenous attitude in your heart, I suspect, to get away with it. But I did get away with it, and it was something I'm not proud of now. But the strangest thing that happened as I became a writer was I fell in love with research, the very thing I didn't want to do in high school. And it became very different when it was researching something I was interested in and cared about, and how Dickens plays in that. I had never read Dickens till I had gotten a college degree and was out of the educational system. And one day I thought, I wonder if this is any good. I still had my doubts because it had been sold to me by the academic side of my life. And I picked up A Tale of Two Cities and absolutely fell in love with Dickens. And I got to the end of that book while I was in bed. And it was late at night, 2 or 3 in the morning. My wife was sleeping beside me. And I got to the closure of the book and broke down in tears. And my wife woke up, thought I was having some sort of heart attack. And I said, no, it's just this beautiful ending to this book. And so Dickens became one of mine and one of the leaders' favorite authors.
I'm curious, this past year, what was your favorite book you've read? Do you have a current book that you've enjoyed and would recommend?
Yes, actually I do. I was reading a new book. It wasn't quite, I was sent an advance copy by an author named Matthew Pearl, and he has a new book called The Award. And I get a lot of books, and I just often don't have the time to read them because I read so much research these days. And for some reason, this sort of intrigued me. It's a novel about somebody who wins an important literary award, but very great problems arise from the winning of it. And I thought, oh, this might be interesting. And the book is so true about academia, about literary awards, about the publishing industry. I had never seen anyone write about it so fearlessly. And I was so charmed by it and taken by it, and all the twists and turns in it, that I had to write the author and say, this is an amazing book, and I loved it. He came back and said, would you blurb it?
Yes, I'm sure he did.
I don't blurb very many books. I used to blurb more than now. But I said, absolutely, I will certainly do this. And I pushed it in my e-newsletter online, which is the only newsletter I do. And I just thought it was a wonderful piece of work because there was so much truth in it.
I'm sure he was thrilled. I mean, what a delight to get a call from you to say, I love your book. So I look forward to checking that one out as well. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm curious about your typical day of work. You have such a interesting and methodical way of working. And I was curious, can you just share a little bit about what the secret is to your amazing productivity as an author?
Well, it basically comes to one thing. I once heard that I agree with. The secret to productivity is keeping your ass in a chair. The chair has to be right in front of the keyboard, and then it works. If it's in front of the TV or somewhere else, it's not quite so effective. I get up in the morning about 5 o'clock. I have breakfast, read the paper, and walk the dog. By 7:30, I'm at the keyboard, and I work through till dinner time. I do that at least 6 days a week. I like long sessions because I fall away into the story. If I were to work, I know writers who work 3 or 4 hours a day, and they do fine that way. I can't. I have to be in the story, and as I begin each day, I have to work my way back into it. And I have to feel in the shoes of the characters and really where it all is taking place. And then it starts to flow for me. I used to work later than 5 or 6 o'clock, but our first golden retriever broke me of that habit. We only had her 2 days until the second day. She came into my office about 5 minutes till 5 o'clock. Dogs have a sense of time, and anyone who's owned a number of them will tell you it's an uncanny sense of time, especially when they know what time it is to get their food. They're always right on the clock for that. But this one came around the corner of my desk and stood looking at me at 5 to 5. And I said, what? She stared very intently. And at 5 o'clock, she came over and laid her head in my lap. And once the dog lays their head in your lap and is determined not to leave, it gets very hard to get anything done except pet the dog. And I just thought I was a one-off. The third day she was there, she came in at 5 o'clock and the whole routine started again. And about day 5 or 6, I was just bright enough to get what she was trying to tell me. It's time to go play. It's no longer time for work. And I started quitting at 5 o'clock, which I largely still do. So I worked from 7:30 till 5, which is still quite a lot of hours to get into that day. And productivity results from that. Fortunately, I've never had a dog that tries to stop me at 3 o'clock because as beautiful as Goldens are, you can't reject them. So I'd probably be stopping at 3 now.
I'm curious that one of your daily part of your writing process is to put your manuscript away for safekeeping every day. Can you talk about why you do that?
Well, this habit started, I was stupid enough to mention this in another interview with him, which now I have to answer. I save manuscript at the end of every day. I save it, then I save it to a CA backup, and then I put it into a box and take it into the kitchen and put it in the refrigerator, because my feeling is that even if the computer crashed and the backup crashed and the community was destroyed in a fire, the manuscript in the refrigerator might survive when they came back to the burned out site. And I know that sounds strange, but it's a habit I can't reject. And on those nights when I forget to put it in the refrigerator and I go to bed, I always remember I've forgotten and I have to get up, go downstairs, get the script and put it in the icebox. But it's worked. I've never lost a work in progress.
And it sounds like you shouldn't mess with it. This is really clearly working for you. That's great. You've mentioned in the past that you've modeled some of the strong women characters in your book after your wife, Gerda. And I'm curious, did she provide any inspiration for anyone in The Friend of the Family?
I think the wife in the family is probably based on she's a very emotionally supportive person, a very together person who knows how to get anything done. My wife's background is in accounting. So I have never balanced a checkbook in my married life. And in fact, I've never balanced a checkbook before my married life. So she takes care of things. I mean, I know if it's in her hands, she'll deal with it. It'll get done correctly. And that's like the wife in the novel, The Friend of the Family. So I draw upon her very often. My wife is sort of not afraid of anything, and that's a great quality to have in a wife or in a husband.
I know you and Gerda were high school sweethearts, and obviously you've talked in the past about your relationship and your partnership. What's the secret to keeping your partnership so strong for so many years?
I think it goes back to the first date. I'll tell a story about that. First of all, we were in high school with 1,200 students. It was a small farming town, but they came from all over the county to that junior and senior high school. And so it was the town was 4,000 people, so 1,200 in the high school was pretty odd. And she was every year president of her class from 8th grade on. I, every year from 8th grade on, was the clown class in my class. So we lived in different worlds within those 1,200. And I had never seen her at that time, and I was 1 year ahead of her. I was a senior, she was a junior. And one day I saw her in the hall in classes, or actually it was I don't want to lengthen the story, but I was in a car driving around on the weekend with my best friend from high school, and she was standing on the street corner. And we stopped at the street light, and I said to him, "Who is that?" And his dad was the town banker. My dad was the town drunk. And he said, "Oh, you don't want anything to do with her?" And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Her dad is the town shoemaker." I thought, well, this isn't a class issue. My dad's the town drunk. It's a huge step up to become dating the town shoemaker's daughter. And I therefore proceeded trying to ask her out. The first time I asked her out, she said, "I can't. I worked that night in the dry cleaner." So I worked that evening in the dry cleaner. And I was a kid so shy that I couldn't ask a girl out twice because I knew everyone knew who my family was, my father was. And I assumed that's why I was being turned down. So I asked her out a second time, and she said, "Oh, I can't. I'm working in the movie theater that night." And I thought, damn, she forgot the line. It's the dry cleaner. But somehow I got the courage to ask her out yet again. And this time she said, "Oh, I can't. I'm babysitting that night." And it turned out she was. She had part-time jobs and babysitting because her father was an immigrant from Italy. And his philosophy was, when you reach the age of 13, if you want anything, including new clothes, you have to go earn it. So she had all these part-time jobs. Somehow I got the courage to ask her up yet again. And she said, "Oh, I can't, I'm busy that night." And I had been very cunning. I didn't ask her out until I felt I was asking her somewhere she had to be. And I was asking her to her class dance. As president of her class, she surely had to be there. Instead, she said, "Oh, I can't, I'm busy that night." And I said, "You can't, you're the class president. It's the class dance. You have to be there." And she said, I'm going to be there, but I have to sell tickets for the first quarter of the night. Then I have to sell a refreshment for the second quarter of the night. Then I have to run the record player for the third quarter of the night. And then I have to be in the cleanup crew. And I said, "Well, then that's going to be our date." And it was our date. That was a Saturday night. On a Monday, I was standing at our locker in the corridor, being just the kind of anxious, nerdy kind of date that a woman would turn down on reconsideration. And as she came walking down the hall to her blocker, I got up my courage and said, I had a wonderful night on Saturday. How was it for you? And she said, I laughed so hard all night. I had a sore stomach the next morning. And I went, all right, this must have worked. So that has been, I think, the secret of our marriage. We have the same sense of humor. And I was a class clown, and I've never stopped being one. And there is nothing that happens in life that you can't laugh at given enough time. That's the secret, though, given enough time.
Well, thank you for that wonderful advice. That's terrific. So I know you've both been supporters for many years of Canine Companions for Independence. And if you were here in the theater, you'd see that we have some volunteers and two amazing dogs with us here today, Hooper and Jet. And you dedicate your book to Canine Companions for Independence. I was wondering if you could just talk about why the organization is so important to you.
Well, I read an art newspaper article about them way back when. And I was writing a book called Midnight, and I needed, it was a supporting character. I needed some particularly interesting supporting character. And I read this piece about Canine Companions, which provides assistance dogs or service dogs for people with severe disabilities. They've grown until they provide them for veterans with PTSD, for autistic children, and it's astonishing how these dogs can change an autistic child, can eliminate almost all of the unpleasant behavior and allow the child a more focused life. And when I read this article, I thought, that's the character I need, so I put him in the book. I was foolish enough not to think I should mention Canine Companions at the back of the book. And when it came out, it was my first #1 bestseller. And some people from Canine Companions wrote to me and said, oh, on the paperback, would you mention that we're a real organization and put something in the back of the book about us? And I slapped myself upside the head and said I should have done that already. So I did it, and we were then invited to go to their Southern California campus, which was at that time in San Diego, and meet with them, and I became enraptured with what they do. It's amazing how they can change lives of people with disabilities, often who couldn't live alone and suddenly can because of all the dog can do, or how families are changed because of how it changes the child with the disability by having the support of this dog. It's an amazing organization. They do not charge anything for these dogs, though it costs a lot of money to train them and provide them. So it's basically an act of love. And Jared and I got into it because we're amazed by these puppy raisers who spend all this time, I think it's like 15, 16 months, raising the puppy until it's ready for advanced training and then giving it up. I can't even imagine doing that, even for such a good cause. But many of these puppy raisers do it over and over and over again. And I've just met so many wonderful people through the organization. I highly recommend it.
Well, you've famously gotten 3 dogs through Canine Companions, and it's been fun watching their adventures through the years as Trixie and Anna. We're both quite prolific authors like yourself, writing books. And now you have the wonderful Elsa. And you told us recently that she's working on a screenplay. Can we get the details on that?
Well, first of all, these are release dogs that get to it. Well, Trixie, our first, which I see there, she was in service with a young woman who had lost both legs in a traffic accident, beautiful girl. And Trixie was in service, but then developed an elbow problem and needed surgery. And once there's a joint problem, the dog can no longer be an assistance dog and needs a home. Trixie came to us. Anna was released because she got to 21 months of training, but they couldn't break her from chasing birds. So she couldn't very well be an assistance dog. Elsa came to us because she also got to the 21-month mark. And we no longer say they failed out. We say they've had a career change, because we don't want to labor them with that other term. Elsa had a career change because they called me up and said, we have a release dog, needs a good home. And we had just lost Anna 2 weeks earlier, and we were so devastated at the loss of our first dog, we couldn't do it again for 6 months. So they said, we know it's too soon to do one, but we do have one. It's only been 2 weeks. And they showed us her picture, and we couldn't resist. We took her in. But Elsa was released because she didn't want to work, she wanted to cuddle. And I said, well, that's perfect, actually, for our purposes. And our first 2 dogs, I wrote books, I think it was 6 books.
Yeah, it was a lot. They were, yeah.
Yeah, with Elsa, and a couple of them were bestsellers. And so then I did a book with Anna that did very well also. So people kept asking and asking, is Elsa going to, I did it with Anna, that other book, but asked, is Elsa going to write books? And I sort of got tired of saying, no, 2 Koontz dogs writing are enough Koontz dogs writing. But I finally said to somebody recently, no, she's not working on a book, she's working on a screenplay. If she ever delivers one, I'll let you know.
Oh, thank you. Please keep us posted, because we like all the details. So,
it would probably be a good movie.
So in The Friends of the Family, you introduced the German Shepherd character, Raphael, and you mentioned that he's as handsome as Rin Tin Tin, but can't act. Can you tell us a little bit about that character?
Doing the research of the period, 1930 to 44, in the film business and all of that, you come across the name Rin Tin Tin because it was a big star in silent films, which were just going away in 1930, and sound was coming in. And so I was reading about, because I decided I wanted a dog in it, but a different kind, because Rin Tin Tin was such a star in silent films. And I was reading about it, and I discovered that he wasn't the first dog they were looking for film, but they couldn't find a dog who would actually do what they wanted. And it was burning up huge amounts of film trying to get him to do things. And they came across this dog, Rin Tin Tin, who had been a little bit of something of a war hero and was so well trained that he could do everything they wanted for him in the film. And I thought, okay, so I will have a dog that is the mirror of Rin Tin Tin, but was one of those dogs that failed to be able to act. And I just thought it would be sort of amusing to have him be a dropout.
One of the many amusing characters from the real-life Hollywood stars, and even the Chef Boyardee. There was so many just interesting characters in your story as it unfolded. And of course, at the heart of it is the kind-hearted couple who rescue Alita and take her into their family, and with their 3 children, and how her life changes. And of course, you have a monstrous villain or 2 in there as well. Without giving away any spoilers, because you really keep the readers on the edge of the page right to the very end. So without giving anything away, what would you like people to take away from this book?
Well, I hope it's very suspenseful and all that, but it's really about a book that simply takes the position that to some degree we're all of us outsiders. And I do believe in this, that most people feel of themselves in one way or another are somewhat of an outsider, or are uncomfortable in all kinds of situations. And if you think about the different characters in this book, many of them were outsiders. The couple who take her in did not have good childhoods. They were outsiders themselves. the book tries to take that and to make something really special with it by folding Alita into a family that has a sense of that and a sense of beauty and wonder of family life. And it's a kind of different book. And this is the best way, I think, to tell you why it's one of my favorite books of my own. And it has to do with my wife being my first reader. She always reads the manuscript before anyone else does. And she's my toughest, but also fairest critic. And when I know her reading time, I know how many pages she gets through in an hour. I gave her this script. I finished it on a Friday morning, 6 o'clock. I handed it to her to go read. And I thought she'll be done with this around noon on Saturday. And it's a different sort of book. So I was very nervous about what she'd think of it. And noon on Saturday came. I'm working in my office and I look at the clock. She's not there. I wait. 1 o'clock, she's not there. 2 o'clock, she's not there. 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. A little after 4, I hear pots and pans banging in the kitchen. I know she's finished the script, and now she doesn't want to come talk to me about it. So I got and never has this happened before. So I got my nerve up, and I went into the kitchen, and I said, well, and she looked at me and said, I don't know how to talk about this book. Well, I've always had a lot of self-doubt. My first thought was, oh, I've written a loser. And I said, what can't you talk about? And she said, well, I need 2 boxes of Kleenex to read this novel. And I went, yes, that's the intention. Not to make you cry, but to make you feel. And then if you want to cry, go right ahead.
I think keeping some Kleenex handy for this book is a good suggestion for anyone who hasn't read it yet, and I'll leave it at that. Well, so this is my final question I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but just this month, Spokane has added direct flights from Orange County. And of course, you live in Orange County, very close to John Wayne Airport, I happen to know. And I'm curious, is there any chance we might get you up here in the future?
There's always a chance. I will say this, I used to fly, but many years ago, I was on a flight to New York City, and we hit high turbulence, such that we were dropping 3,000 and 4,000 feet in 2 seconds. The plane was just plunging and then coming back up and plunging, and people were screaming. And it was a hairy trip. And there was a nun on the plane, and she was in habit. This is many years ago. And we got to a point where it was so bad that the nun got out of her seat and started to shout, "We're all going to die." And I took that as a sign that I should not fly for a while. And I did not fly for quite a while, but one never knows. I may end up coming to Spokane. I'm 80 years old now, so how much longer can I expect anyway? Might as well go out quickly in a plane flight, but if that happens, I would do it coming home. I wouldn't do it before I got to
Okay, good. So we'd get you. Well, thank you. It is such a delight, and I would love to spend all afternoon talking with you, but I think it's time to share you with some of our readers who have some questions. And so we'll set that up and invite anyone who would like to come and ask questions. They'll be able to see you, and you'll obviously be able to see them and answer. But before we go to questions, I just want to say thank you so much, Dean. This was such a pleasure. Really such fun.
I am super excited that I don't have to run around the theater. But this way, he can see you ask the questions. Please don't be shy. You just have to walk up here to do the question. It's all good. There are people in line at 2 hours ahead of time to get in tonight, or this afternoon, I keep saying. And they're sitting in the back, and I know they would have a question, and they should move up here. You should. I knew this was going to happen.
Just want to say hi, Dean. I'm a big fan of yours since Strangers, so been with you for a long time. My question is, are we ever going to get the continuing story of Christopher Snow?
I knew what that question was as soon as are we ever. I would just say this. I wrote the 2 Christopher Snow books as the first 2 books with a new publisher. And I had left my old publisher for a number of reasons. And I went to the new one, and the second Chris Snow was delivered, and the publisher absolutely hated it and tried to put me through rewrites of the last 80 pages that I knew I couldn't do. And I liked this publisher as a human being, and I didn't know what to do. So I said, in order to save our relationship, I said, look, I'm supposed to do a 3rd book, but I'll do you a different book first, so that you get something you like. Because if I had delivered the 3rd Chris Snow, I don't think I would have had to get another publisher. I don't think he would have stayed with me. And I didn't want to do that. So I delivered, I think it was False Memory. And then I was about to go back to the 3rd Chris Snow, and an idea for a book called From the Corner of His Eye hit me. And I was so fascinated with the idea, I had to write. The next thing I knew, I was several books down the road, and I still hadn't done number 3. Now I'm with a different publisher, and the problem is the previous publisher owns the first 2 books. So we get into all kind of legal entanglements. I know how many frustrated people there are. I was frustrated myself. And maybe the day will come when I'll just back up and do that no matter what the legal entanglements were. But those are the kind of behind the scenes things that happen. And readers love those books. But if people in your business life don't get it, then you have some real problem moving on with a 3rd book that will need promotion and publicity that they won't give it, to be frankly true. So that's what happened with that, and I've apologized endlessly for not delivering the 3rd book. And it'll probably be the last words out of my life on my deathbed. I'm sorry, I never got Ride the Storm.
All right.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Thank you for that question.
I want to say long-time listener, first-time caller. In The Friend of the Family, you use Alita's dreams as prophetic dreams, but you use dreams a lot in your books, and I'm wondering how you feel about using dreams to further the narrative.
Well, I've had dream issues my whole life. I've had a repetitive dream in which I die in an airplane crash. I've literally had it maybe 50, 80, 100 times.
Oh
But what's odd about it is I'm not in the plane. In the dream, I'm standing at an airport, on a runway or near a runway, and a plane crashes, and in the dream, I stand frozen while it tumbles on fire directly toward me. And I always wake up before I perish, but it's a very odd dream to have. I've had a number of different dreams. I've had a couple. People think I get a lot of novel ideas out of dreams. I don't. I've had 2 novels that came to me as dreams, and over all these years, that's not a very high percentage. As for using them in novels, this I will give, in this book, I give credit to my editor, Jessica, on this. I delivered the friend of the family. She's a very good editor and sweet. I delivered a book after this that she sent to me 1 page of little suggestions and said, if you don't want to do them, don't do them. That is not how relationships with editors usually work. But she gave me some good thoughts on the friend and the family. But one of them she gave me was, she said, I think you should write a dream sequence at each of the part breaks in this book, of which there are 4, and then have them be something that your character, Alita, wrote long before this family ever meets her and adopts her. And I thought about it, and she explained why, and I thought it was a very good explanation. So I sat down and wrote those dreams. Now, the dreams are not identical. They're very subtle dreams about what may happen to her. And they need to be kind of interpreted. But in the end, and I don't want to give away a spoiler, the family learns about these dreams as a way that helps them manage their grief. Oh, I'm giving things away. I shouldn't give away, but yeah, I think dreams are interesting tools, but you can let them get out of hand. So, but in this case, it was a very good editorial suggestion, and that's how they ended up. Then I had to figure out what these dreams would be, because I didn't want to give anything away.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. What a good question. What a great answer, too.
Got another one coming?
Not me.
No? Yep, right behind you. Can he see us? Yes, he can see you.
Hi, Dean. I was introduced to you a long time ago, 1987, when you wrote Watchers, and they did a film regarding a very highly intelligent golden retriever named Einstein. In the story, the dog uses Scrabble blocks to communicate and spell words. As a dog lover, and knowing many dog lovers, you draw us to your whimsical characters regarding their desires and their warmth and how they see the world. I just wanted to compliment you. I've known 5 golden retrievers in my life, and I understand them. I get them and they get me. So thank you. I think you draw a lot of young people to your work through your kindness with animals and the love that you have for them.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Well, dogs have revolutionized my life, and I beat myself up for being so long to bring dogs into our lives. But now that we have, it's just been the most glorious trip together. Each dog is an own personality, just as much as human beings. So you never quite know how it's going. There's mine. You can get her too sensitive. And I think she heard the word dog, and that means you got to be up front. But thank you for all. Here she comes.
Hi, Dean. I'm a very much a longtime fan, and again, like you said, books saved my life. Grew up hard, and your books were some of the most important to me growing up. And I wonder how you find it, hearing your story. You talked about your childhood, but hearing your story, how do you find the ability to go from one extreme to the other with your care and your understanding of the downtrodden? Besides Odd Thomas, By the Light of the Moon is one of my favorite books, Flies Not Fries. You know, you understand and you help us to feel so much for them, and yet you're able to go so far the other direction with your bad guys and your bad situations. How do you do that? How do you go from one extreme to the other so strongly?
Well, I think it's, as for the villains, let me start with that, because I think I figured that out. I often get, wow, your villains are pretty bad people. How do you get that? I've mentioned my father. I've seldom in public spoken about this latter part. But after I escaped that house and got married, my mother had passed away, and my wife and I moved west. And we were out here just not even a year. And somebody called me up and said, I'm a friend of your father. It was actually the only friend he had. And he said, your father is very ill. He doesn't have long to live. He'll be gone in a year and he's destitute. Now, my father, this was a long time ago. My father must have been 77. My father was always destitute. He held 44 jobs in 34 years that he was a working person. And he often lost a job because he would punch out the boss. It's not a way to get a promotion, in case anybody there doesn't know that. And he was an alcoholic. He had all kinds of problems. And my wife and I had to sit down and say, well, how do we deal with this? If you can't send him money. He spends it, goes to a bar room and spends it the same day he gets it. He buys drinks for everybody in the bar, he gambles it away. So my wife has great strength, and she agreed. We'll move him to California. We'll take over support of him. We'll get him an apartment, we'll pay his bills, and we'll look after him. Well, that 1 year turned into 14 years. And that we were responsible for my father. And he was also a hypochondriac. He was always calling an ambulance to go to the hospital until the hospital would say, never let him come here again, because they have to take him in overnight, and it was never anything wrong. As a consequence, we had a lot of experiences. At the end of it, he twice tried to commit violence against me, in both cases in front of witnesses, in one case in front of a great many witnesses, and in both cases he ended up in the psychiatric ward. And I got a diagnosis in the second case of my father having been a sociopath who was also an alcoholic, not a good combination. That then said a lot to me. It explained a lot to me. And it explained also your question, where do these characters come from that I write about that are capable of anything? That was my dad. And I think I drew on experience. We never knew what he was about to do next or what trouble he was about to get into. So that's part of that. And you want to write about something to say to other people who go through this with somebody in their family, there is a way to handle this. There is a way to get through it with people like this. And I will try to give you different people with that kind of character. On the other hand, my mother was a very sweet person. How she endured what she endured. She died very young, 53. I think it totally wore her out, and she ended up with a series of strokes. And as a consequence, I think in a way, that awful family life gave me the ability to go from one extreme to the other, to that very compassionate person that I can write about, to that very uncompassionate person, which was my dad. And I often think about it, why I'm able to do that wide swings, because there are swings within the same story, because I'm asked that a lot. And I think it's that. It goes back to what my childhood and adolescence were like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The X is the spot? All right. Mercy. This is almost as good as talking to him in person. Technology, I tell you. Anyway, I was wondering, of all the novels that I've enjoyed you writing, Dean. Uh-oh, is that me?
Yeah, that's
Now I'm scared.
Look at me.
No, some of the novels that I really, really enjoyed is the Odd Thomas series. And I was wondering if you're going to write any more regarding that character, Odd Thomas, and his friendly ghost friends. And maybe I'm not speaking. To me, it seems to me like I'd like to know where you got the concept of him. Is it possible that at one time you were a little bit like him?
Well, I don't see the dead among us, but I will say all the times I've seen my own face on the screen, I have your very reaction. Oh my God, is that me? And somehow in a mirror it doesn't look the same way. But I wrote 8 Odd Thomas novels, and I never imagined, I knew I was going to write a few. I was working on a novel called The Face, and partway through it, I was having a good time with it. I loved the characters, and it was going well. But suddenly into my head came the line, my name is Odd Thomas, I lead an unusual life, and it had nothing to do with what I was writing. And I turned around, I keep a yellow legal pad beside me to jot notes to myself about things to remember to cover in later chapters. And I started writing that line out so I wouldn't forget it. And the next thing I knew, I was writing the whole first chapter of the first Odd Thomas novel, which I spent the whole day doing it. And nothing like that ever happened to me before or since. And I thought, okay, when I look at that after I finish The Face, I'm going to think it stinks because I wrote it all so fast. I went back after I finished The Face months later and looked at that chapter, and it ended up almost word for word in the book. I don't know where that came from, but I loved that character so much that I wanted to write more with him. Now I'm back to the same publisher who 2 times didn't like books of mine. And the second one was Odd Thomas, which he disliked so much he wouldn't talk to me about it. He said the editor had to talk to me about it and give his concerns. And he knew I wanted to write more Odd Thomas books. So we had a deal that I would write a book with something else between each of the Odd Thomases, which I pretty much did. That book series could have gone on a long time as far as I'm concerned. But I felt so close to that character that in the first book, I had made a promise to him that I don't want to give anything away to people who haven't read it, but the promise had to do with something he got on a card out of a fortune-telling machine in a carnival. And I felt so much for that character, I thought, I have to give him what he's been promised and what he expects. So in book 8, which is called St. Claude, that one, he got what he's been waiting for. If I were to write more, which I wouldn't mind doing, I'd have to back up and put them in between other novels in the existing series. It is something I've thought about, so I don't rule it out, but we'll just have to see. The problem again is those books were owned by another publisher and with a different one. Also, there was a half-decent movie made of the first book. It could have been a great movie, but the director, who also read the screenplay, had some of his budget disappeared. I won't say what happened to it. I'm not sure he even knew, but he had a $35 million budget. And one day people came to the site in Santa Fe where he was filming and said, oh, by the way, you only have $17 million. And he had to suddenly, while shooting, rethink the entire movie. So it never turned out to be as good as it should have been because his screenplay was fantastic. And I've always felt sad about that and hopeful that somebody else will come along and make that all over again in a proper way. So if I could write a book and encourage them to remake the movies because of that, read the first movie because of that, I would do it in a minute. But otherwise, I tell you again, I'm 80 years old, so you got to be careful about starting a new series.
Well, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Yeah, we're on the same page.
Yep. Yep, this is the last question.
Boy, am I honored to be the last one, Dean. I've been sitting in the back here, and tears have been coming down my eyes when I've been watching this, and I go, what am I, a big baby for? Can I actually go up there and say something to this guy that I revere? My wife, who's sitting back there of 50 years, she's called me a pet keeper. That would be a good name of your next novel. She calls me a pet keeper because I've been working with animals since I was born. We have 2 dogs, 50 pigeons, or 100 pigeons, and 50 falcons, because we breed falcons. And I told her the other day if we could rescue German shepherds or some dog, because we live on a big piece of land, I'd do that. But what I'm saying is, so I've been back here sobbing, and this is such an honor, but I wanted to get up and thank you, because every book I read of yours, and I've read them all, and now I'm getting big print at the library, and I'm reading a quarter of the book, and I find out I already read it. And so I'm getting old. But the thing I wanted to say to you, because I've been a bit of an outcast as a pet keeper, but is I can count on every one of your novels bringing out something good about humanity. And I find that passage, and I'm sitting in bed, and I only read 3 pages a night. And I hit that spot, Dean, and I cry, because I can count on you taking us down to the depths of humanity, but you always bring us really back up, and I thank you for that. Thank you.
Wow.
You did.
Wow, what an ending. Any final words, Dean? I always like to give the author the last word.
Well, for that gentleman there, I want to thank him for that. First of all, the reason he's sitting in the back row up there crying right now, I explained earlier, when you see my face on the giant screen, you're going to end up in tears. I'm sure that's happening throughout the audience. Then I like the idea of raising 100 pigeons and getting a bunch of German shepherds on the same property. Those shepherds are going to be very happy. It's the two things really work. Now, I so much. I used to love going to book signings. I still would if I could do it. But meeting people and getting their comments and questions, it's always uplifting. And as for that uplifting thing, I'm an optimist and believe humanity has a long way to go. And I have never been one who budgets it or designs his readings about how bleak the book can be. A lot of books, a lot of writers have a very dark view of everything. There's a lot of apocalyptic fiction out there. I have a different view of humanity, and so it ends up in the books. And thank you for noticing.
Well, thank you, Dean Koontz. What an honor. That'll end our interview, and I'd like to turn things back over to Rob Curley, who has some others. But just my heartfelt thanks to you, Dean. What a pleasure.
Well, we need to thank Dean. How cool was that?
Yeah.
Hang out for a day. Thank you so much, Dean. Everyone had a great time.